This video is how to graph a sine wave that is f of x equals an amplitude of 2 sine x minus pi over 3. That's my phase shift of pi over 3. Even though it says minus, it's still, we're going to be moving things to the right by pi over 3. So the amplitude here is an amplitude of 2. The phase shift is a positive pi over 3. And the period is still 2 pi. All right, we need to now find our 5 critical points. We're going to start with the original 5 critical points. Which are 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So these are our 5 critical points before we do the phase shift. Because we're doing a phase shift of pi over 3, we're going to be adding pi over 3 to each of these 5 critical values to get our new critical points. So we're going to take 0 and add pi over 3 to that. That's going to give us pi over 3. I'm now going to take pi over 2 and add pi over 3 to that. That's going to give me 5 pi over 6. Make sure you get a common denominator when you add your fractions. Next up, we have pi plus pi over 3, which gives us a 4 pi over 3. Again, you need to get common denominators for these. Next up, we have 3 pi over 2 plus pi over 3 gives us 11 pi over 6. And lastly, we have 2 pi plus pi over 3 gives us a value of 7 pi over 3. My bad. Pi over 3, 7 pi over 3. We're now going to graph and label the x-axis and y-axis appropriately. Y-axis. And on the y-axis, instead of going up 1 like we normally would, we have an amplitude of 2. So we're going to go up 2 and down 2. And now we're going to label our x-axis and start with pi over 3. That's where we're going to start our new graph. Last, I'm going to put, the next one is going to be 7 pi over 3, and I'm going to put that one down before the others. Now halfway between these two is exactly 4 pi over 3. And halfway between pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3 is 5 pi over 6. And halfway between 4 pi over 3 and 7 pi over 3 is 11 pi over 6. And now I'm going to graph them, starting with pi over 3 at 0. Pi over 3. Then I'm going to go up 2 at 5 pi over 6, because we have a new amplitude. Back down to 0 at 4 pi over 3. Down to negative 2 at 11 pi over 6. And back up to 0 at 7 pi over 3. And here are my 5 critical values that I need to graph my sine wave. Do your best when you're graphing these. They're not always going to look perfect, and that's okay.